Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to use an API with our React application. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and simply an API acts as a bridge between different software systems. That means it allows them to talk to each other and share data. So this is what our application is going to look like. We're going to have find countries and we're going to have an input field, and in here we can input different countries. So we're going to start, let's say, with E. Our application tells us that there are too many matches. That is because our application lists the name of countries when there's less than 10 matches. So we're going to add another filter. Let's add in T. Now we get a list of countries that have E and T in their name. Next, we're going to add another filter. Let's add an H. Again, our list shrinks. And finally, when we add an I, we have a single country, and our application renders the different details. So we have the name of the country, then we have its capital, the area the country covers, we have the list of languages, and finally we have an image of the country's flag. So we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it using APIs. And we're going to open our terminal and navigate to this folder. And in here, we're going to run our commands. We're going to call our project countries, and we're going to use the React template. Once that's done, we're going to cd into our project, and we're going to run npm install to install our dependencies. We're also going to be communicating with the server, so we need the Axios library, so we're going to install it. Once that's done, we're going to set up our main file. In our main file, we're going to import the app component. We're also going to import React DOM. And we're going to use React DOM to render our component. Once that's done, we can save our file. And before we go to our app file, we're going to set up a services folder. This folder is going to contain all the communications that we'll be making to the server. So in our source folder, we're going to create a new folder called services. And in the services folder, we're going to create a file called country.js. And in this file is where we're going to put all our communications. So in the country file, first we're going to import Axios. Then we're going to define our base URL, which you can find in the description below, so you can copy and paste it. And the function we're going to define is going to be called getAll, and it's not going to take in any input. And it's simply going to return axios.get, and we're going to pass in our base URL. So this is going to get us all the countries. Once that's done, we need to export this function. So we're going to have export get all. Now let's go ahead and see what this URL looks like in our browser. So we're going to copy this link and open it in the browser. So this is what we're going to see. It's going to be a list of objects, and each object is going to represent a single country. The different informations we'll be extracting in this video include the common name of a country, the official name of a country. We're also going to access its capital. We'll access the area the country covers, the list of languages, and finally we'll access the country's flag. Now in our app file, first we're going to import the useState function, and we'll also be using the useEffect function, and we're going to import it from React. The next thing we need to import is the services, which are in the country.js file. We're going to call it country services, and we're going to import it from the services folder, and we're going to access the country.js file. Now we can define our app component, which is not going to take any input. And we're going to define our different states. So first we're going to have a variable called countries and set countries. And initially we're going to give it a state of an empty array. Next, for our search functionality, we're also going to have a state, and we're going to call it search and set search. And initially it's going to have a state of an empty string. Now we need to get all the countries from the server, and we're going to store it in the countries array. And in order to do that, as we saw in the previous videos, we need to use the useEffect function. So we're going to have useEffect, which takes in a function. And in here, we're going to use the country service. So we're going to have country services, and we're going to access the getAll function that we defined in the other file. And once we have that, we're going to use then, which is going to give us a response. And using that response, we're going to set countries to response.data. So what response.data holds is a list of all the countries, and we're going to store that list in our countries state. Once we've done that, we're going to define our return. So we're going to have a wrap, and in here first we're going to define the search functionality. So we're going to have find countries, and we're going to have an input field where the user can input a filter, and this input field is going to have an onChange attribute. So whenever the input changes, we want to run a function, and we're going to call this function handle search change, and we can close our input tag. Next, we're going to have a component that we haven't defined yet, which is going to be called filter, and it's going to have two inputs. So it's going to take in the list of countries, and it's going to take in whatever we input inside the input field, which we're going to store in the search variable. So it's also going to take that. And now we can close our component. So before we get started with the filter component, let's define the handle search change function. So inside our app component, we're going to define a function called handle search change, which gives us an event. And in here, we want to use the set search function, and we're going to give it the value of event.target.value. So this is going to be whatever the user inputs inside the input field, and we're going to store that input inside the search variable. Now, once we've done that, we need to define our filter component. So outside the app component, we're going to define a component called filter. As we said, it's going to take in two inputs, which is going to be the list of countries and the search term. The first condition we're going to have is we're going to check if the search is empty or not. So if search is equal to an empty string, in that case, we want to return nothing. This means that the user has not inputted any filters. And if that is not the case, we want to define a variable called filtered. And we're going to use the filter function to filter out the countries that match the search. So we're going to have countries.filter, which is going to give us each individual country. So the condition we want to check is if country.name.common, which is going to give us the common name of a country. And we're going to convert this into lowercase. And we want to use the includes function, which is going to check if whatever the user inputs in the input field is included in the common name of a country. So we're going to pass in our search variable, but we also want to convert this to lowercase. So this is going to make our application function whether the user puts in capital letters or small letters. It won't matter because we'll be converting the input to lowercase, and we'll also be converting the name of the country we get from the server to lowercase, so it will be easily matched. The next thing we want to do is check the length of this filtered list. As you saw in the beginning, if we have more than 10 countries, we don't want to display a list. And if we have a single country, we want to display the details of that country. So we're going to have an if condition, which is going to check if filtered.length length is equal to 1. That means we have a single country. In that case, we want to return the details of that country. So we're going to use the map function. So we're going to have filtered.map, which is going to give us an individual country. And we want to return another component, which we have not defined yet, which is going to be called country details, which is going to take in a key since it's part of a list. And as a key, we're going to use the country's official name. So we're going to have country.name.official. It's also going to take in an individual country. So we're going to have country and we're going to give it the input our map function gives us, which is an individual country. And now we can close our component, which we'll be defining later. The next condition we need to check is if the length of the list is less than or equal to 10. So we're going to have an else if statement, which is going to check if filtered.length is less than or equal to 10. In that case, we also want to return filtered.map, which is going to give us the individual countries. And instead of using the country details component, we're going to use a different component, which we'll be calling country. And we also need to provide in a key since it's part of a list. Again, we're going to use the official name of the country. And finally, it's also going to take in the country as an input. So we're going to pass in the country we get from the map function. And now we can close our components. And finally, we're going to have an else statement, which means the only condition that's left is if the filtered list is greater than 10. In that case, we want to return a div that says too many matches. Specify another filter. So this component is going to contain the logic for filtering out different countries. Next, we need to define the country details and the country component. So we're going to define the country component first. And as we said, it's going to take in one input, which is going to be the country. And we're going to return a div, which simply displays the country's common name. So we're going to access country.name.common. So this is it for our country component. Next, we need to define the country details component. So we're going to have const country details, which is going to take in one input, which is the country input. And in here, we want to return a certain format. So we're going to have return and we're going to have our wrapper. So first, in the country details, we want to display the country's name. So we're going to have an h1 tag, which displays country.name.common. Next, we want to display the country's capital. So we're going to say capital, and we're going to substitute in country.capital, which is going to give us a list of capitals. In our case, we want to access the first element of that list. So we're going to provide the index 0. The next thing we want is the area the country covers. So again, we're going to have a p tag and we're going to say area, and we're going to access country.area. And next, we're going to have the list of languages that are spoken in that country. So we're going to have an h2 tag that says languages. And under that, we're going to have an unordered list. And inside this list, we're going to have another component. So we're going to call it languages, which we have not defined yet. And as input, it's going to take in an individual country. And finally, under the list of languages, we're going to have the flag. Again, we're going to use a separate component for that, which is going to be called flag. And it's also going to take in the country input. Now from this component, we can see that there are two more components we need to define, which is the languages component and the flag component. So first, let's define the languages component. So we're going to have languages, which is going to take in one input, which is the which is the individual country. Now, if we go back to our API, which is located in the link that we stored in the base URL variable, we can see that languages is actually a dictionary. So it has a key value pair. And in our case, when we list out the languages, we want to access the value and not the key. So in order to do that, we have a function that is going to extract the values from a dictionary or from an object. So in here, we're going to define a variable called langs, and we're going to use object.values. So this is going to extract the different values from our object, and we're going to pass in country.languages. And once we have a list of the different languages, we're going to return them. So we're going to have return, and we're going to have langs.map, which is going to give us an individual language. And we want to return an li tag that contains the language. So since this is a list, we need to provide a key. So for now, as the key, we're simply going to use the language itself, and we're done with our languages component. Finally, the last component we need to define is the flag component, which takes in a country as input. And it's simply going to return an image tag, which actually does not need a closing tag. It's a self-closing tag. And in here, we're going to provide the source of our image, which is going to be country.flags.png. So that is going to be our flag component. Finally, let's just review the return statement of our app component. So in our app component, we're returning the filter component. And in the filter component, we have different conditions that are going to check whether we have the required amount of countries in our list. And depending on that, we're going to return different values. And in the country component, we're simply returning the name of the country. In the country details component, we have a certain format that we want to follow that is going to display the details of an individual country. Then we have the languages component, which is going to return a list of the different languages. And finally, we have the flag component, which is going to return an image tag. So now we can finally export our app component, and we're going to save our file and open the terminal, and we're going to navigate to our project, and we're going to run npm run dev. Now we're going to open our application in the browser. As you can see, we have a search field. So inside the search field, we're going to search for an individual country. Let's put in E. As you can see, it says too many matches. That is because there are more than 10 countries that contain the letter E. We're going to continue. If you look at the console below, we are getting a warning. But for this application, we're simply going to ignore it. But it has something to do with using unique key props. So back in our application, we're going to add another filter. Let's add an H. We can see that the list of countries has shrinked to 3. And finally, we're going to add one more filter. And now we have a single country. So we have Ethiopia, we have its capital, we have the area, we have the list of languages, and finally we have its flag. We can try another country. Let's put in Spain. So we're going to have S. We get too many matches. We're going to have P. And now we get Spain. We get the capital, we get the area, we get the list of languages, and we get the flag. So this has been an exercise on using APIs in your React applications. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel to show your support.